Hi, my name is Dana Kletke, and I'm the co-executive director of Mentoring Artists for Women's Art in Winnipeg. I'm also a visual artist, and I work in drawing and mixed media. We are located in Treaty 1 territory on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and the present, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I am here today with Alexandra Ross. I'm excited to talk to you about your work in the exhibition, My Roots. I know you haven't always lived in rural Manitoba. Could you talk a little bit about your background and how you came to be an artist?
Sure. Yeah. I call myself an American nomad, and that's because we moved a lot. So I'm an American citizen, but now a permanent resident of Canada. Um, yeah, I was born in Georgia. We moved to Arizona when I was quite young, about 4 years old, and then we moved down to Costa Rica when I was 13, 13, turning 14, and that was a really big experience. Moving teenagers, I don't recommend moving teenagers. So it was quite a disruptive experience. And then after that, I left home at 18 and went backpacking and met someone in Scotland while I was backpacking and followed them to Manitoba, having no idea where Manitoba was or what I was doing as an 18-year-old. And landed here and crash landed, as it were. That's how I describe it, because I was a teenager and with no fixed address. And I grew up with very unusual parents who were dedicated to living a very independent life. And we moved. There's a huge story, and my whole body of work right now is working through that story. And my mom's an artist, so we grew up in a very creative home. We were encouraged to be creative people, and so I think growing up, or like becoming an adult, I avoided becoming an artist. So I pursued anything but being an artist for a while, and I worked in frontline crisis work for 10 years now, but for a couple of years, and then realized that I was not cut out for stable employment. And that, again, that's another big kind of exploration of my work. The disruption. We were also unschooled, so we didn't go to school, which I think definitely influenced my capacity for employment that is like stable and steady. So a lot of my work is exploring these themes of like that inner chaos and how all the ways in which it's manifested in my life. So I avoided being an artist until I couldn't anymore, and then I caved in and started participating in some like small markets and stuff like that, and realized I didn't want to just produce the same thing. Like I didn't want to have a product that I produced, and so I decided to go to school and get a degree in fine art. Yeah.
Wow, that's quite the journey.
Yes.
And then you ended up in rural Manitoba.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I part of my employment took me to Steinbach, so I crisis work in Steinbach, and I think I was rootless for so long. When I arrived, I didn't know like where I was from. If someone asked me, "Where are you from?" I couldn't tell, because it wasn't the place I had just come from. It wasn't the place I was born, and it wasn't the place that it wasn't here. So I just didn't know how to answer that question. So it kind of became a central piece of like, well, where do I belong? And all of a sudden, what belonging became was the people I was around. And so I began to forge really close friendships with people I I think I've met like some of the best people on earth. And I suppose if you land anywhere, there are wonderful people everywhere. So I set down roots here, and the people I set down roots around happen to be from this area. So that's where I've rooted.
Yes, and your exhibition, My Roots. So it's really an exploration of how you came to have no roots, or that you are creating roots, your own roots on your own terms, in a
Well,
way.
yeah, in a sense, like that's the adult, like that's the beauty of being an adult, is that you have choice. But I think when you're a child, you don't really have choice. Like you are given like you don't get to choose your family. You don't get, there's many things that children don't have the power to choose. And so like I was given a set of roots, and I would have if given an option, I wouldn't have chosen to have a disrupted life. Like I would not have chosen to move to Costa Rica and say goodbye to my family. So part of it is exploring the ways in which decisions that were either made, if you're not making those decisions, the impact of other people's decisions on identity and self and experience, and then as an adult, kind of deciding what am I going to how has that influenced me, who I am, and then what do you do with that? Like what then? So these are my roots. It is what it is. Yeah.
That leads me to some questions about your work in your exhibition. So you have two large, well, I imagine them to be large, but hard to tell on screen. Two black and white digital photographs that are self-portraits.
Yes.
One maybe more calm, the other maybe more chaotic. I'm wondering if you could talk about these two works and the symbolism in these two works that you use.
Sure. Yeah, the self-portraits are kind of where I'm most comfortable starting with each month. So each month I've dedicated this whole year to exploring like personal narrative. And the portraits kind of crystallize many of the thoughts. So I've taken one experience or one event and essentially tried to photograph myself in that moment or in that experience. So my first portrait is of me, and I've posed myself as I remember being, and as my journals reflect, and with some of the material remains that I still have. I think I was 19 when I arrived to college here in dorm, and so my first experience kind of with that institutional education, and I had brought all the things that I believe to be essential for my for my survival in this world, this Manitoba. And people had warned me about the winter, so I had gone into a thrift store in Pinawa, because that's where my parents were at that time. So I bought like the warmest jacket, which was like what I would now think of as a spring jacket here,
Right.
not knowing that there are seasons of jackets. Like, so and then also like gold leaf, because I believed that if something was important, you should, hand letter it and illustrate it with gold leaf, and that made it special. So I made sure to bring my gold leaf and my point shoes, because I wasn't sure if maybe I would start training in dance again and join a dance troupe. So I just wanted that option. You never know. And like, yeah, 18th century or 19th century poetry, because I thought I was just a supreme romantic, and brought everything that I felt I needed. And it was just this moment in time. And so I've taken that experience of like unpacking these essential items and photographed myself in that moment, the self that once was. And then the same thing with my second portrait, which is all about unschooling. So I surrounded myself with the material remains, both like the homework, the assignments that we did. So we were taught ancient Greek, Koine Greek, as young children, and taught to memorize the periodic table of elements and taught myself Egyptian hieroglyphics, and yeah, so I put these things around me and photographed myself like with these things as markers of what, 11-year-old me thought was really important and was learning at that age.
I was wondering what the language was within that photograph.
Right. Yeah.
So and you continue to do this photo work, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So each month there's a new theme that I explore. So unpacking because there's so much in the personal narrative that it's overwhelming to think of just, I'm going to tell my story from A to B. And so I've given myself monthly themes to like work through.
Wow. It sort of leads into the other work in your show, which is sculptural, with materials such as tree branches, clay, and thread. And these works, when I look at them, the way you've wrapped them is very delicate, and it reminds me of like a real tenderness and fragility, especially within the loose threads. And I sort of read it as maybe a blood or bloodline with the red thread, and maybe linking back to family. The clay and sticks remind me a little bit of bone. And I'm wondering, like, these are a little different because they're sculptural than the photo works. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about working sculpturally and what inspired these works, or if there's more than one work. I don't know I think there's one on the show in the exhibition.
That's right. Yeah. So they are root systems that I have found. This one is just the first one that I found it last summer along, I think, Winnipeg Beach. I think root systems are very sculptural just on their own. And when I found it, I felt like, oh, this is a self-portrait. Like I looked at the root and thought, this is so twisty. And like, I just really identified quite strongly with the roots. I really enjoy assemblage sculpture. So I really enjoy taking different things and creating a work, especially discarded things. Am I allowed to move this camera at all? Like I'll just quickly. That's right. Let me just see if I can reverse. Here we go. Okay. So I have this lovely bin of like discarded things, and it's so exciting for me. There's like wires and like plugs. I won't dump it out because it gets quite chaotic if I do that. But I really love the process of taking specifically things that are discarded and then creating work that I call it chaos, like creating a bit of chaos. But I think in chaos, I think the thing that I keep coming back to is that even chaos is, in my understanding, which is very limited in scientific, because obviously I never went to school and I did study art, and science was not really a thing for me. I don't have a scientific brain, but I have tried to read a little bit into theory, and my understanding of chaos is that it's actually order, but it's just it's so complex you can't actually see the order. And I feel like when it comes to personal narrative, a lot of the work we do as adults is to look back and put order into like, and we're constantly reinterpreting ourselves, and we have a new interpretation as we emerge into further into our own selves and whatever. And I feel like these sculptural elements to me begin to are metaphors in many ways. So my clay is very experimental. I take the rules around clay, what you're supposed to do with clay and how it's supposed to work. And then I can do a little bit of that, but I also enjoy breaking the rules and seeing what happens. So it's quite experimental. I use materials in my clay body, or not in my clay body, but instead of using glazes as a traditional, in a traditional way, I will do that a little bit. So some of the white that you can see, some of the white glaze is dripped onto the pieces, but there's also just raw ingredients. So raw glaze ingredients, and seeing how each of those ingredients fire and interact with different cone temperatures is fascinating to me. They each have their own properties. And so taking them and putting them over the clay sculptural pieces, I find that really quite interesting. So I'm there a little bit in the process, but there's this whole other process that I can't control, that the material itself is interacting. So I feel like it's a bit more of a dialogue. And so I'm responding to the material, and the material is responding to what I do to it. And I feel like there's just one big metaphor for life, like how we respond to different stimulus, and we can shape it a bit, but it shapes us and it shapes our decisions. And then I install those clay works to the root in a way that makes sense for clay, and in a way that like I can actually secure it without it shattering. Like there's all these considerations that go into where they get installed on the root. And then, I did a print work. And so pieces of that print become wrapped into the sculpture as well. And then that all gets wrapped around with this string, this thread. And maybe it's a bit heavy-handed, the thread of life, the weaving a narrative. There are lots of weaving metaphors, right? So I spin. I have my spinning wheel right there. And there's just this connection to, I guess, storytelling and history, and this idea of the string as this ancient technology that goes deep, like our deepest roots into human history, and it connects me. It's this connecting thread, that kind of thing. So each month, along with a portrait, each month gets a root ball, and there the pieces that I make around each root ball is directly correlated to the portrait and to the topic of the month in metaphors.
Wow. I also see within that, you're talking about your connection to people, but it seems like there's also a real connection to land in there as well.
I hope that's true. I feel very, very much, like I'm not attached to land in the same way that many people who grew up in one place are. And I feel like a settler narrative is another huge piece of this that I have yet to push and explore, because I am American, and I come from like 300 years of colonizing settler history, and each that whole narrative there is something that is I feel like definitely plays into like this culmination of my parents, who are just restless and decide to move, and I feel like there's definitely something to explore there. And I long to be connected to land, but I feel very displaced, like that I don't have like it's not mine to be connected to. It's been disrupted too many times, and it's contested. I'm a settler. Like there's so many ways that my connection to land is this tension of longing and also disruption. But roots need land. Trees need land to grow.
Yes, well, thank you for that. It's a lot to think about and process, and I can see a lot of work coming out of that.
For sure, yeah. I'm a baby artist.
Maybe moving on from that is your mentorship with Brenna George. I'm wondering how that went, what that looked like, and what, if anything, you were able to take away from that mentorship and use within your art practice.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, my experience now is that I graduated during a pandemic. Right. So I have like this 4 years of academic art experience, and also opted, because I already have an honors degree. I just couldn't justify. I'm in my 30s, and going back to school in your 30s is just it's a different thing. I'm in a different place. So I really felt like I couldn't justify my fourth my fourth year honors, even though I really wanted to. But I definitely felt like I needed some support. Like I was emerging in a very vulnerable place. And that if I didn't spend the next year pushing myself, that I could easily just not feel the pressure to keep up my practice. And of course, rural Manitoba plays into this, and having it's hard to to be around other artists who are creating and feel that same thing that you felt in like school, because you're surrounded by artists and materials and access to studio space and studios, right? So I think I was a little bit scared of losing all of that and not knowing how to figure out how to do this outside of the academic setting. So that's kind of the context that I applied to the mentorship program with Brenna. And it's ongoing, so we haven't finished our mentorship year, but it's been fantastic and so different than the academic world. So whereas the academic world is just tons of pressure, and it's sometimes good, like it's sometimes good and healthy pressure, but it can be stifling too. So this is different in the sense that having Brenna has no syllabus, has no sense of like she's not giving us a grade. We're not trying to compete for something. It produces a very different kind of productivity, I would say, and it's very much helps me to listen to what I'm actually thinking and doing. There's still direction, which is really important. So Brenna was in our first few meetings, she talked about you need goals, you need to refine. You can't just do everything you want to do immediately. You have to choose. And I think for me, that was critical. And it was very hard to focus on like just one thing, because I have so many things that I want to focus on. So choosing, it's through this mentorship program, and particularly with Brenna's direction, that helped me to like refine it to personal narrative. I thought I would avoid personal narrative and just like, well, my story is my story. I'm just going to do work not about that. So having that somebody who's been an artist for a much longer period of time, to say, to do this, you need to limit yourself. You need to put things into, she has a word for it. Like, I think it's a box of some kind, like I want to say a containing vessel, but I don't know that that's the word. And just do the thing in there, and then you can grow from there. But I would say that was critical.
Oh.
And yeah, just so gentle. There's no grades, and there's deadlines, but they're not like, you will fail this class if you do not produce X, Y, and Z. And I respect the academic system. Like, I think I certainly need deadlines. Having an online exhibit before the final exhibit has been fantastic, because it forced me to take all these ideas and produce something. So yeah, I certainly need that, but the gentleness and the guidance, kind of nurturing element of it all, yeah, I would just say it produces a very different, it produces a different inner dialogue. And then that in turn, I believe, produces a different process. And how could that not produce different work?
Mm-hmm. Well, mentorship is very special in that way, because it isn't about academic results, and it's really, you're accountable to yourself, but you have someone supporting you along the way. And I think we all need mentorship in our lives at different points.
Definitely.
Of time.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that it's been such a positive experience. On the website, it does say that there's a performance to come.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how that will happen?
Yes. I mean, I'm very drawn to performance. I'm drawn to, I think, and maybe specifically, I'm drawn to ritual, like new rituals. And so I don't know exactly what it'll be, but I definitely feel it. I feel it's there, and it can't not be there. And I feel like it's very much tied into spinning, and so I'll have a few by the time that I'll do the installation in Brandon, I'll have a few root balls at this point, and each of them will have their own threads. So some kind of thread and a new thread, and I'm not sure, and maybe there'll be some thread cut and some I'm not sure. I just don't know. But I feel like there's something about a thread. There's something about spinning, about making new thread. There's something about taking old thread and making a new something, and the body. And I'm just, yeah. So it's there.
It's percolating.
I can't tell you exactly what it'll look like or what it'll be.
Well, that sounds very exciting. And it will be in person. So what is the plan for the work? Is it to be installed in Brandon at some point, or is there a date, or?
Yes, I should know this off the top of my head. I think it's in September.
Okay. But,
yeah, I think it's September, October.
Great.
In that window. And yeah, so I mean, I guess option one, the ideal option would be in person, but possibly, I mean, who knows? COVID, you just never know. But the other thing that I am drawn to and that I enjoy doing is performances where there's photography involved. And I work with film photography. Not the portraits that I have up right now are not film, they're digital. But the very finite material laden nature of film photography for me is I just love it. So another option would be for me to do the performance and photograph it and install the photographs. I don't know.
Right.
And maybe install an assemblage in place. Like, so this thing took place and here's the remained. I don't know.
Right. That's to come.
Yeah. Yeah. Still working through. Yeah.
Well, it's exciting. And have you done performance before? Will this be more of your first time with an audience, or is it something that
I've done a different performance before. I'm looking at the photo in the back there. That was, I would say, like that. I think like won me into performance. And it was like body alter, and it was about sort of moving from like it's again very much a personal narrative. And my friend tattooed me, and that was photographed. Another friend shaved my head. I was stripped and then put. There was a blanket I have from my great grandmother that was put over me, and then other women pinned material that their people in their life had given them. And so this was photographed. And I would say it remains like a moment of like, it was a transformative experience for me. Yeah, I think I studied theater in my first BA, and I encountered this quote by Maria Abramovic. And she says, I'm going to murder it, but like performance is like theater is fake and performance art is real. And I took offense to that as a very theatrical human until I did that performance where it's like, oh, I am actually tattooing. This is not just a staging of tattoo. I'm not pretending to alter my body. I am physically altering it. And this can only happen once. And this actually happened in time and space. And I feel like that moment of connection has like made me think of performance art as this category of art that is transformative. And so I haven't done many performances, and probably I won't in the course of my life. I won't do tons because they're very intense, I think. But I'm really drawn to that idea of the transformation of self or space, and through art, and having some witnesses, but also just understanding that you asking people to participate in a performance is a big thing too. Like, so yeah, those are my, again, baby artist thoughts on performance art. Like,
Well, and having an audience, it becomes your shared moment together as well. You're
yeah.
revealing, sharing, and it becomes something quite special, I think, too, with especially if they're participating or even if they're just witnessing. It's definitely in a moment and transformative in many cases, for sure. I'm just looking at the time, and I think we might be at time. So I just wanted to ask you, is there anything that you would like viewers to know about your work or the show before we end our conversation that we haven't touched on?
Gosh, I would say it's like the show. It's called Momentum. It is a point in time. This is like my initial explorations of my roots, and even my roots is like the working title. Like in conversation with Brenna, like, what do we even call this? Like, what is it? What am I trying to say? So it's very much in flux. Like this is work in progress, and it's emerging. It's an emerging idea and emerging themes, and I guess also just gratitude. I'm so grateful for the opportunity, and I appreciate people taking the time to look and engage and think about the work. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and I look forward to hopefully being able to see your work in person. Hopefully this fall.
Yes.
Well, thanks again, and I'll say goodbye.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.